Hi everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you to Kwan for playing. And we'll play the three pieces by Silvestre Revueltas, the Mexican composer from the first half of the 20th century, whose music is really worth getting to know, especially the orchestral pieces. He was also a violinist, so unsurprisingly, this piece is rather virtuosic, but also for the piano. And we'll start right away. I think you'll enjoy this. This is the first piece of the three pieces by Revueltas. And now we really have the privilege of understanding a little bit more about this music from really the authority on Revueltas, I would say, in the world. This is Roberto Kolb-Neuhaus. He just told me he spent 25 years of his life really researching Revueltas. He's written books, produced CDs, edited the digital library of manuscripts. He's really the person, and I think there will be a lot to learn from this. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be able to contribute to your work. Thank you very much.
Well, of course. So I thought we would start, first of all, with really the basics. Who was Silvestre Revueltas in a short way?
It's a pertinent question, certainly, because Revueltas is not very well known outside Mexico. And in Europe especially, he's hardly known. But basically, well, he's considered in Mexico the possibly best composer in the first half of the 20th century. But he was a very real loner. He would have, he isolated himself from society a lot. And also he just spent 10 years of his life dedicated to composing. He died at age 40 very, very young. He was born on the last day of the 19th century, the 1st of December 1899. So he was very young, he was just an adolescent when the revolution broke out in Mexico. And his father sent him and his younger brother, Fermin, who became a painter, he sent them away, in a way, I suppose, for reasons of security, to study, in Austin, Texas. By then, Revueltas was already playing the violin. He started off very early in life. He gave his first recital as a violin player when he was only 11 years old. So he must have been quite exceptional. As an adolescent, he basically then moved on to Chicago College of Music, where he got his degree as a violinist. And then he went to San Antonio, where he got a job as a violin player, playing in silent movie theaters. And then in around 1929, I guess, so 28, he got a job in Mobile, Alabama, also in charge of a small ensemble accompanying silent movies. This is interesting because it was the first job that he got where he wasn't a violin player. He was already a conductor and was in charge of choosing the music. So there was this gradual, transition towards being a composer. He had composed ever since he was a kid, just for fun. But his first compositions, were written around 1924.
And did he actually have composition lessons, or?
Well, this is one of the great paradoxes. In all the biographies, they say that he got his first composition classes in Chicago, but I don't fully agree with that. He studied, harmony and solfège, etc. But to me, that is not composition class. No, I think everybody basically agrees that he's a self-taught composer. It was in 29 when he was called back to Mexico by Carlos Chavez, the better-known Mexican composer. He was invited by Chavez to come back to Mexico and work as assistant conductor in Chavez's orchestra, and also as a violin teacher in the conservatory. And he also conducted the school orchestra. And that is the main reason why he came back to Mexico. What he was expecting in Mexico was not what he found. Just in 27, he got divorced from his first wife, and a letter has survived in which he explains to her why it's not possible for him to go on living with her. Now, whether this is really the truth or not, we'll never know. But let me read you a few sentences out of that letter, because it defines him in terms that we need to acknowledge here. It was very important. He writes to her, "The things on which we apparently agree are of the same nature outwardly. At the bottom, profoundly, they differ completely. Your ideology is based on the social ethical conceptions of the bourgeoisie that is fighting its lost battle the world over. My idea of the social ethical problems have another sense and different sources. They come from the people, the workers, the oppressed, and the exploited, makers of the future." And so on, it goes on. Basically, by then, Silvestre Revueltas is already an incredibly committed, passionate political person. He absolutely believes in socialist utopia. He adores, the dream of the Soviet Union, and all he wants to do is go back to Mexico to be with his people and to fight along with his people. But really important to define, he defines his people not as exotic and beautiful, but as workers, oppressed, exploited, no? And he will sustain these beliefs throughout his life until 1940. You know, most of his works are directly or indirectly influenced by his political views. So this is very important. But then suddenly he comes to Mexico and he finds things that really bother him. He comes back to Mexico, he's given a job at the conservatory. Now, what does the conservatory, what is it like when he comes there? Well, he's completely shocked because he finds that all the composers teaching at the conservatory, all they do is imitate European music. All they want to do is feel like they belong into the realm of Western art music. And so they imitate. No? And at most, what they will do is take some popular music and domesticate it, you know, arrange it in a Chopin style or so to you know, but that is about as far as they go, no? And Revueltas is completely, well, bothered by this, you know. Once he wrote a letter to his wife, he was in Paris at the time, and he's talking about European culture. And this is important to share with you because it explains why the three pieces for violin and piano are not an imitation of what's going on in Europe. They're in fact quite different. No? He writes to her, "What a far cry from our way of being in every sense. Despite all our defects, there is so much more generosity, more real life in those young people." He means people in Mexico. "This Parisian, super civilized people seems to me to be dried up inside. Everything is regulated, measured, organized. The color of the sky, the trees, the houses, the food, love, friendship, everything is full of courtly refinement, completely indifferent. At first it's deceptive, then it becomes almost repulsive." It's very interesting in relation to the three pieces, because as we will see, the first and third movement are everything but regulated, measured, and organized. So he's already, you know, taking a stand and saying, no. I don't want to be like the Europeans. I want to be different, no? So basically, when he got to the conservatory, he started a war. Basically, all the pieces he started composing were meant to disturb the audience at the conservatory, to bother them, to attack them, no? And the three pieces are decidedly among the pieces that were meant to bother the audience.
Yeah, I was wondering about it also a little bit because of the dynamics that I see. He's not trying to be nice, you know. It's for fortissimo, for long stretches. And he reiterates it a few times. Yeah, definitely not trying to be nice. Yeah.
You know, I don't know what you think, but when I listen to the first and third movements, I find that you know, that the musical, the gestures that he demands of a violinist are extremely grotesque sometimes, exaggerated.
Yeah.
It seems to me like there's a sense of parody there, like satire.
Yeah, and is there? Yeah, now that you're saying it, I'm really thinking about the beginning of the third movement, for example. It's so up high. I mean, it really it means to be a little, satirical, or something like that. Yeah,
and I mean,
grotesque.
he was a violin player, so he knew what he was doing, and he knew what was possible and what was not. You know, when in San Antonio, he was playing. A Guarnerius violin. I don't know if you knew that.
No,
It
I
wasn't
don't.
his. He was not a rich man. Some rich man had him, but they wouldn't give a Guarnerius just to anybody.
You were talking a little bit about how, I guess in Paris, he didn't feel like those were his people. So who, when he came to Mexico, who did he think were his people, and how, so what kind of music does he attribute to them in his works?
Well, yeah, I think the first thing that must have shocked him and really bothered him is that he realized that the government, the post-revolutionary government, together with the new society, the upcoming middle classes, newspapers, private companies, etc., were building sort of a visual discourse about what it is to be Mexican. This was completely invented. It's not something, I mean, people tend to forget that Mexico, there are more than 68 languages spoken in Mexico. There is not such a thing as a singular, unified culture. It's impossible to say what is Mexican and what is not Mexican. So what they did was invent, a definition of what it is to be Mexican. So they used the imagery, especially of the mariachi. And I sent you a picture that I found on a magazine that was, basically magazine read by the middle and higher classes. And right there on the top, you have this blonde, blue-eyed woman in a mini skirt, white woman, of course, with a mariachi sombrero, a hat, dressed up like a mariachi, and that is so far, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of images, but I think that's the one that I found that I find just staggering, unbelievably clear at the fakeness of the definition of Mexicanness, And especially, you have this mariachi person who is clearly bourgeois, as Revueltas would have said, using the clothing of the poor people to ornament herself, right? And this is so far away from the description of the people in terms of exploited and poor, and this is exactly the opposite. So, and he finds that this is the discourse, this is what the state and society is saying about this. The school books, for the kids have these images on them. Indians, white-skinned Indians, white Indians, all decorated, sort of exoticized. They were creating a new definition of Mexicanhood that was absolutely or sort of disrespectful of the real poor people who were not dressed up like that, right? And so I also sent you some images of the people who Revueltas was concerned with, who were not, exotic and picturesque, but they were poor and they were dressed like poor people, and they lived in the streets, and there were, beggars, and they, I sent you a picture of a painting that's really great. It's a woman selling lottery tickets, a poor woman selling lottery tickets, or two people, workers, standing outside in the street in front of the house of a very rich person, but the people are the maid and the milkman who comes to deliver the milk. They are the subjects. And these are the subjects that interest Revueltas, not the people living inside the mansion, but the maid and the milkman. This is where he draws the line. And of course, for him, the big challenge is to see, okay, how do I approach this definition from a musical point of view? Now, of course, Revueltas wrote several songs in which the people who figure in these poems are the lower class people. So that's very easy then to make a point which people he's talking about. But in a piece like the three pieces for violin and piano, where there are no texts, how does he approach the people?
Mhm.
And he does.
Yes.
He does. It's not easy to prove, but I do have my theories. No, basically, I think he basically pursues two goals in the three pieces. One goal is to attack those who expect law and order, aesthetic law and order, to provoke them. And the other is to give a musical voice to the lower class people. No? And you find these segments inside the fast, provocative movements. Suddenly you hear the voice of the people in terms that are not disruptive, they're not aggressive. Suddenly there's peace there.
That's right.
And then the noise comes back. And the slow movement, not. The whole slow movement is absolutely not provocative. No? There is this single voice represented by the violin sounding. It's an invented melody. He's not quoting folklore, which is what the nationalists did. He's writing the music himself, trying, in my opinion, to sound the voice of the people, let's say, to speak along with them.
Yeah, and in general, you were also mentioning to me before visual arts and how you find connections between them and Revueltas' music. Could you maybe expand a little bit on that too?
Yes, thank you for the question. Revueltas sort of established a symbolic alliance with a group that was called the Stridentists. The Stridentists was a group that by then didn't exist anymore, but he was befriended with members of the Stridentist movement. Among them was his own brother, Fermin. Fermin was the painter, and he had learned to paint in Chicago. They were both in Chicago when they were studying. One was studying painting, one was studying music. Fermin was a member of the Stridentist movement. So that means that Revueltas was very aware of the Stridentist movement. And I sent you some images by Fermin where you can see his aesthetics, which is, kind of collage, kind of very daring paintings. But the Stridentist movement in itself was inspired by the historical avant-garde in Europe, especially, I would say, Dadaism, because Dadaism was a movement that was also an anti-art movement. They were really also, just like Revueltas, angry at the pretentiousness of high art, and they created collage that were totally crazy, where you just assemble the craziest things, throw them together without law and order, and whatever comes out is what you put on the screen or on the canvas, or or poetry, like also completely irrational poetry. And that was a really, really provocative art. And although the Stridentists did it in a very, very Mexican way, but the goals were the same. And to me, Revueltas is basically the Stridentist musician. At the time, the Stridentists, the Stridentist movement was from 21 to 27. Revueltas returned 29. But it was only poets, writers, and painters. There were no musicians among the Stridentists. And in my way of seeing it, Revueltas is the late coming Stridentist composer, because he did exactly what they were doing, but he did it in music, So if you look at, for instance, Dadaistic paintings by Haussmann in Europe, basically, when I look at these paintings, I say, well, this is exactly what Revueltas is doing in the first and third movement. He's throwing are piling up a whole lot of crazy musical gestures that are completely unrelated to each other, and they could be played in any order, and it wouldn't make any difference.
Mm-hmm.
You could even do it, just experiment and take some dice and cut the score up in pieces, glue it together in different order and play it, and it wouldn't make any difference.
Okay, so let's try to see what, I'm going to try this homemade collage from the music. So let's see. We're now going to hear, the segment will be highlighted in different colors, and then we will roll the dice and put different ones together in random order and see how this sounds. So really homemade collage. This is original. Okay. And now we will start in the beginning, but random order afterwards. Yeah, and again, by chance, the segments are completely scrambled. Okay.
Well, it certainly makes me laugh.
Okay, so that's good. But I really think, there is something in the music really does inspire sort of visual. I mean, the colors were also somewhat random, but there is something very also striking when one hears this music. One can really hear colors if one could use this sort of slight absurd notion. But yeah, there's a lot of visual aspect to this.
Right, yeah. But I don't know, and from that point of view, I would really suggest, if possible, there's this one section right in the middle of the first movement, which is not at all like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be really helpful for your audience to be able to identify and hear the contrast, with suddenly this long section of a singular melody that in the end he even adds third intervals, which is typically folk music, and so it's to me like Revueltas is there saying, this is not what I want and this is what I want. Sort of establish the contrast right within the movement between the lower class people and the the sophisticated art music international scene, that he's trying to make fun of. So I hope you can find a way.
Maybe I could even play it right now. Just that phrase that you're referring to from the middle of the movement. I hope this can. So this is it. continues.
Right, exactly. No, it's a completely different feeling, and it is continuous, and it is intimate, and it is passionate, and it is honest, and there's no caricature, there's no satire there, no?
Wondering if there are perhaps other works by Revueltas that you could sort of recommend for people who, are really just getting to know this composer for the first time, things that are worth listening to and what to listen to exactly.
Another work that is worth mentioning is also quite unknown. It's also symphonic. No, it's not a symphony, excuse me, it's a symphonic ensemble. It's called Street Corners. And that's very relevant because it has no folkloric melodies at all. But what he did is he just put out his ears in the marketplace and started hearing the cries of the street vendors, and realized that these cries, people selling their goods on the streets, do have a musical component. And he basically absorbed those street cries and transformed them into musical gestures, loose gestures. Loose because they're loose in the streets too. They're not melodies, they're just gestures. And he composed a whole long work made up completely of an assemblage of, I wouldn't say collage, it's more like a montage of street cries. Just in the first movement, there's more than 70 different ones. They are never repeated.
Yeah, thank you so much for all this information. It helped me a lot understand the music better, and I thought it was fascinating. And so thank you. And now we'll hear the full piece, 3 pieces rather, for violin and piano.
Well, thanks so much for allowing me to contribute to this. It's been a real pleasure. you.